All electronic devices, including mobile phones, should be switched to silent. I would ask that any members of the public who have joined us in the room today do not interfere in the proceedings, and as soon as the hearing is closed, please leave quietly. So I am Deputy Catherine Curtis, the chair of the panel.
I'm Conotard Mark Labby from the parish of Greville, and I'm Vice Chair.
I'm Deputy Helen Miles and I'm the panel member.
Deputy Rob Ward, Minister for Education and Lifelong Learning.
Keith Posner, Interim Chief Officer in SIPES.
I'm Andrew Heaven, Assistant Director of Policy.
I'm Alexa Munn, Head of Governance and Digital for SIPES.
Okay, thank you, everyone. So I have a general question to start with, just a little opening paragraph. So online harms refer to a range of negative experiences and risks that people can encounter while using the internet. Minister, based on your understanding of the current legislation, policy and cultural context in Jersey, please can you share what you consider to be the top 3 protections that children in Jersey currently have? So this is not about policy and development, it's what they currently have.
I can talk about in schools, and there are a number of mitigation processes in schools for online learning. So the risk of digital harm is recognised and is an ongoing concern, and I think it will always remain an ongoing concern because it's a very changing world and we have to adapt to that. And that concept is not new. It's been going on for a long time. There's various safeguarding measures in place, including software designed to mitigate harm in the digital environment. And they enable teachers to manage online risks and promote safer digital experiences for students when they're using online to teach. So, for example, key flagged terms are used within digital systems to identify and mitigate potential harm. There's 2 pieces of software. One is Lightspeed, the other one is...
Activian.
Activian, yeah. Okay, so there's 2 pieces of software that overlay access to the online access in all of our schools. That's the safeguarding line. There's parental guidance on online safety to ensure parents are equipped to keep their child safe online. There's been a targeted campaign in collaboration with the NSPCC, specifically on Year 6 students. The school evaluation scheme that we use now, the
Jersey Schools Review.
Jersey Schools Review Framework has a specific area of its review on safety and online safety, so that schools are evaluated. I'm not going to use the word judged because it's not a judging process, it's an evaluation process, and it should include the schools. That's an integral part of what we're doing.
So
there's a lot of others.
Top 3 that you thought were
I
currently
think
available.
the top 3 are the software that overlays our schools. I think that the other one is the fact that it is part of the schools review framework. It's become front and centre to what we're doing. And I suppose the third one is that there is a mobile phone policy in every school, and I have talked about this a number of times now in terms of schools, and indeed on the 15th of May another school introduced a more stringent mobile phone policy after some work, but we'll probably talk about that later.
Okay, great. I think actually it's your question next, isn't it?
Yes, certainly. Thank you, Chair. Minister, in your opinion, what is the role of schools and places of education in providing protection to children and young people from online harms? The role?
Yeah, well, the role is to give safe access if you're using school access to the internet for teaching. That is very important. The second is an education role itself. The information on how to behave online, what safe is online, and giving that access to digital knowledge and understanding of the world that we're living, I think is a really important part of what we do in schools. Also, the dealing with issues when they arrive in conjunction with parents' safeguarding needs and the myriad of people who might be involved is an important role. But they're not the only people who have to be involved in that. So that's the main role of schools, I would say, in safe access online. But they have been drawn into the world of mobile phones, obviously, and I think they've done an enormous amount of work to try and deal with that issue as well.
In your opinion, Minister, how important is education in providing a defence against online harms and promoting digital safety in comparison to other factors, such as legislation?
I I don't know how to compare in terms of percentages. I'm obviously horrendously biased towards the importance of education because it is. I would say it's really important that young people have access to an online world that is safe, so that they know what it looks like and they know how to behave, and they can have their behaviour in that online world modelled for them at school when they access through school systems. So I think that's absolutely vital. I think if we didn't do that and we had no access at all, I don't know how we would prepare young people for the world that they're living in. And that is a really important point, from how to use online banking to how to actually research properly, and how to write an essay which isn't plagiarised, for example. Because there's a whole world there that sometimes young people fall foul of simply because they have not used the right approach.
We understand that as schools, statutory responsibilities for safeguarding in relation to online safety are set out in the Jersey Schools Review Handbook. How is the statutory responsibility monitored?
Well, it would be monitored via the reviews themselves. There are safeguarding leads in every single school, which would monitor the processes themselves. I mean, I think it's, to be honest, I would say it would be monitored at a department level as well, within each department within the school. As an ex-head of department, I would want to know about any incidents that had happened as part of the general, overview of behaviour, overview of the way that things were happening in schools, particularly if we were using online systems, online teaching and materials. And there are lots of them now. Some of them are extremely good.
In your opinion, is this monitoring sufficient? We all understand that children spend a great deal of their time outside of schools, but do you think this monitoring is sufficient?
In school, I think the monitoring in school is probably much, much better than outside of school. Is it perfect? I would suggest no, because I don't know if it can be. But is it sufficient? I mean, that's a really difficult one. I would say yes, but it can always be improved. One feature of good schools and good education is they're self-improving, and you look at where there are issues. I think this is the one thing around this issue. The reason that we need a really open, clear and constructive debate is that when things go wrong, we don't want them hidden. We don't want sensationalist headlines when things go wrong and then schools thinking we can't talk about this. We want to be open. What is not happening here? What did not work? How can we put it right? In terms of systems, Alexa, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah,
Because you know way more about this than me.
The two systems that are in place are real time, so it acts as an early detection method to pick up anything immediately. These are logged as alerts. They go directly to the designated safeguarding leads, who then can enact immediately as they occur. They are continually reviewed, the software applications, with emerging technologies such as AI, for example, to then look at to see whether they are still the best possible filtering systems in place, because they change, of course, over time with those emerging risks.
And can I just start? Oh,
I
sorry.
think Keith was
George,
Well, all I was going to say, just in reference to the Jersey School Review Framework, I mean, that is a kind of a pivotal part of our review system, and safeguarding is an absolute key element of that. So when reviewers go into schools, they will want to see that the right processes are in place to ensure that they are monitoring all forms of harm for children, including what happens online. So they've got to make sure that they have the right systems in place and that information is recorded and then acted upon. So that's a key part of the review. So in terms of that part of the monitoring, that's in place through the review system.
That would have been my next question, so thank you.
Can I just check? So when something comes up and it goes to a safeguarding lead, that will just be what's on the school system. So if there's a child looking at something on their mobile phone, and it's not logged into the online Wi-Fi from the school.
So no, if a child brings in a phone and it's been agreed, so it's a BYOD, essentially, bring your own device.
Or even if it's not, perhaps. I mean, if they're just using a phone at school.
No.
In lunch
No,
or
because
something.
they'll be using data. Of course they would. We're talking about the things that we can control if
Yeah.
are using our Wi-Fi systems.
Yeah, so there are the things which you can't control, that's what I mean.
Yes, there would be
Of course there
things.
would be,
Yeah, so when...
But mobile phones, if they use our school Wi-Fi, then actually that is also controlled.
Yeah,
Yes,
it's just if
absolutely.
they're not using the school
Correct.
Wi-Fi on their phones. Yeah,
They're on full
However, it's probably just worth adding there that if the teachers were notified of someone looking at something that they shouldn't do on their phone at a point in time, there would then be systems in place within the school for that to be reported and actioned upon.
And can I just add that there are, I think, only 2 schools now that allow any access at break time. One is, well, I can go through where they are later, and I have been through this a number of times now, both here and in the assembly. So the vast majority, so not a single primary school allows access to mobile phones, so that is not an issue in primary schools. And in secondary schools, there are only 2 that allow for a short time during break in supervised areas. What schools have done is push back the tide bit by bit with the involvement of the young people in the schools. And we are getting to a point now, I think we are 95%, if not 96%, at a point where mobile phones are not used in schools. You would have noticed that JCG had a new policy from the 15th of May, and I think that's I have to give some credit there that the way that's gone about, because they involved the young people, they involved their sixth formers, their student leadership teams, and what should we be doing here? Now they've got a policy where 7 and 8 lock their phones away. I think it's 9 and 10, and then a sight unseen, they must be switched off and put away if they bring them to school. Now that is something that has been worked with for young people. This is exactly the way we should do it. And I would say that when we're talking about this, we must include young people in the discussions.
Yeah.
Because they're the ones that we need to educate into the long term.
Well, I think we have some more questions
Yeah.
on that later.
Yeah.
Sorry, Mark.
So, Mike, in your letter to the panel on the 10th of March, you advised that children are taught about e-safety and online harms as part of the Jersey curriculum, for example, in computing and PSHE, in both primary and secondary. And you are also referenced that some schools have developed a digital literacy programme. Do you think that the current curriculum and delivery is sufficient?
In a changing world, I would suggest that we have to look at all of the curricula that we teach, because the world is changing so much. I think it's a really good starting point, and beyond the starting point, yes, but of course it can be adapted, because, I mean, Alexa mentioned AI. I think that's going to be an issue that we have to address. I know I certainly need training in AI. I don't use ChatGPT, whatever it's called. I don't know. I even get the name wrong. But there's something I would need to train in. But I think there is some really good work going on, yes. I do believe there's some good work going on. Can it be better? Can it be shared more? Absolutely. And that, I think, hopefully a positive discussion around this review can help us with that. And schools can say, look, this is what we're doing. Does anyone want to add what we're at, some of the things that are going on, for example, Alexa?
Yeah, so obviously we launched the digital education strategy in 2023, and one of the particular strands, and that is looking at teacher training and the standardisation, and that to make sure there's parity across all schools, and that everyone, both teachers and students, are at a sufficient level to be adequately teach those pupils what the safeguards that they require to be a digital citizen, an effective digital citizen, and to go into employment. Because ultimately, our children are the ones that are going to run
Sure.
the country at some point.
One of our primary concerns, Minister, is obviously you just mentioned the year 2023. So much has changed in that
Absolutely.
area. It's consistency. We're concerned about keeping up to date in this area. Do you think that is consistent
Yes, because it's evolving and continually adapting.
all the time? Yeah.
One of the projects in primary schools is Education for a Connected World, and it covers areas of self-image and identity, online relationships, online reputation, online bullying, managing online information, health, well-being and lifestyle, privacy and security, copyright and ownership. And that starts in year 6. And early on, there is an introduction to young people about what this is what the online world looks like. We have to be consistent with that. But I think that education, I think there are many adults who might benefit from the course, to be quite frank. And I don't mean that in a patronising way. I do it myself.
Not at all. Not at all.
And I think, yes, you're absolutely right. Is it in a changing world? We have a sort of arms race, don't we?
Yeah.
In terms of the internet itself and how we deal with that in schools. But we're trying to take that on.
What advice is available currently to ensure that there is an age-appropriate approach to educating young people about online harms?
I think that goes with the courses themselves that are designed, because a curriculum is designed specifically for that. You design a curriculum to be appropriate for the children you're teaching. So, for example, PHSE curriculum will be through key stages and design format. But it is a difficult area because you are, perhaps at a younger age, you're going to need to talk about some really challenging issues. I don't think we should shy away from those issues. And I think the skills of the teaching profession and those who are involved we rely on so much in so many other areas, of all sorts of social areas, from, personal health, etc., etc. So yeah, it is a challenge. It has to be age appropriate, but within that there will be some challenges.
Just in terms of, for example, applications that are used in school, there'll be risk assessments that would have to be done in terms of their use, and then that will obviously look at the age appropriateness of those applications to be used with different age groups.
Okay, thank you.
Can I just ask
Certainly.
a question about that? So, is there something done differently for children with additional needs? Because you talk about age appropriate.
Yeah, good question.
Actually, for children with additional needs, age is just a number.
Yeah, absolutely.
Often,
and
yeah.
I think what
Yeah.
concerns me is quite often, and we see it sometimes with sex education, for example.
Yeah.
Children, because they're that age, are kind of sheep-dipped. Could you just talk to us about perhaps different strategies that you're taking as education to deal with the harms around children with additional needs?
Yeah, there was a key concept in education: differentiating work and content for the needs of the child that you're teaching in front of you. It is very, very difficult to do precisely, but that's exactly the type of thing that will need to be done. In our schools, in our special schools, in our ARCs, to some extent that will be easier because there is such a personalised knowledge of each individual. If a child has a record of need, teachers will know that and there will be provision in place. There is a register of SEN which will be identified on what's the register called again? What's the online register where they register? I used it for 20 years, I've forgotten the name. SIMS, sorry, SIMS, which should flag that up because I think that's improved. So there are ways to do it, but you're absolutely right. It's also one of the biggest challenges because we also need to give access to every child to the difficult conversations. Now that might be more difficult with some children, but also they may be more at risk. And we have to take that really seriously. But I think the recognition, this is another area around the provision around SEN, which I've talked about a lot recently, and how we need to make sure that we are adequately providing. And I absolutely agree with you. And I think it's an ongoing challenge, absolutely.
I just wanted to add something to that, which was there was a recent case which has been in the public domain where it was more than one, a girl believed that the person contacting her was a 16-year-old boy, because this is what he said, turned out to be a much more older man. She agreed to meet up with him because partly I think because she was on the autistic spectrum and she was probably trying to be more trusting, and then he sexually assaulted her. So it's really important that children, all sorts of children, are fully aware of what's happening online.
Absolutely, yes, and I would absolutely agree with that. And when I said it, I think sometimes the discussion, I'm going to call it, around online harms becomes polarised. We don't want it to be polarised. We absolutely accept that. We accept that every young person and adults need to know what safe online means and the risks that they face. That young person was not to blame. The person to blame was the person who was the groomer, and I hope there was law to deal with that, and I hope they were caught and put away.
Yeah.
My next question, Minister, is about the online safety lead in a school. Can you describe how the designated online safety lead in a school ensures that children are educated about online safety and related issues?
I think the online safety lead is, I would suggest, more about the control and the recognition on online safety issues. I wouldn't say they're necessarily the person responsible for how online safety is taught, because that would be part of curriculum planning, but they would certainly have an overview of it. And I would say that any curriculum that's planned has to be done with a number of professionals involved. It cannot be left to one person. And I think this is a really important point, actually. actually, you've just got me thinking of something. There is a really important role of online safety lead, but it's also an important role for every single planner of a curriculum and every teacher to recognise there is those issues. And then if they're not sure, they've got somebody to go to, a clearly designated person to go to. You know, I want to use this website. I think it's really good. What issues am I going to face here? And an online safety lead could say, actually, there's stuff there that may not be age appropriate. Don't use it. Fine, absolutely fine. But that's the type of dialogue that we need to have. I mean, teachers in their day-to-day planning, and they plan, would take account of that as well. Doesn't mean you're not going to make mistakes. And I think we've got to be less harsh on the mistakes and more supportive of why did it happen, how can we change it.
The next question actually is what oversight would there be on the online safety lead's role and responsibilities?
Well, that will be part of, line management from the senior management team in the school, of course. I mean, that's their role.
Safeguarding audits.
And safeguarding audits. Do you want to talk just briefly about safeguarding audits? Because I guess I've missed things gone.
So there are annual safeguarding audits across all schools that are designed to help improve safeguarding in schools. And it's used as a self-evaluation tool for schools to look at all areas of safeguarding, but there is a significant area within that relates to online harm and digital safety.
Sure.
So the department work with the schools annually to make sure that everything they have is robust and in place.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. One final question, supplementary, if I may. You've mentioned Year 6 twice in the questions already. Do you feel that that's going to have to go to a younger set of children?
It already happens at a younger age. I think we start in Year 3 very gently.
Absolutely, yeah.
Absolutely.
So within the curriculum.
Yeah, I only mentioned that because it was a specific.
Yeah, specific cut-off.
From Year 3. I mean, I may have mentioned this to you before in a hearing. We went to speak to young people, Year 9s, in one of our schools. We've been to all schools and we always talk to young people about this. And when we mentioned online safety, one of them did sort of look at us and go, and I said, why did I just, can you mind tell me why you got that reaction? Said, listen, we've had this since Year 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I probably know more about it than you do. And I was like, okay, that's a fair enough point. Now, that doesn't mean it's perfect. It doesn't mean that things are all going in for every child, but children are aware of it. Yeah. And I think we have to work with young people and give them some ownership of their own safety as well. This is really serious for you. You have a responsibility in this. And I think our young people do respond to that type of responsibility.
I'm glad that we've aired that in public, Minister. I think it's important.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the question.
I think I've got some questions around online safety policy. Can you tell us whether internal school technical monitoring is a legal requirement in Jersey?
No, it's not a legal requirement, but it is still followed.
Okay. So we asked about internal school technical monitoring in a written correspondence with you, and the reply came back that said, under Keeping Children Safe in Education Law 2022, schools as corporate parents are responsible for keeping children safe online, but we don't have a Keeping Children in Jersey Safe in Education law, do we?
No.
Is it articled then in the children's law or the young people's law?
And this is the issue. Do you want to? Andrew, I've got an answer, but you give the correct bit, and then I'll give mine.
I'll say something, you correct me.
No, I think it's going to be the other way around because
the response.
because you've explained this to me about 7 times. But go on, carry on.
Clarify that. So under the Children and Young People Law 2022, there are duties and articles in there which require ministers and also chief officers to bring forward arrangements for safeguarding children. That in Jersey is the key kind of legislative lever, if you like, that holds those people accountable for safeguarding children. The law is blind to whether that's online or I don't have another or in real life. They're both real life, but online as well. It doesn't distinguish. It's in its entirety. So that's the key point. Of course, the same law also talks about corporate parenting, and there are duties that reflect from that. But I think if I was going to point to the the significant piece of legislation, it would be that,
Children
and it would be the
process law.
safeguarding element. So
Okay.
building out from that, an example. So you have your kind of DSL leads in schools. They would then also be talking, as you would be aware, to other parts of government and other practitioners, talking about quality assurance in terms of safeguarding or what have you.
So
So that's
we-
how the system
So
works.
we have got a robust legislative framework that is fairly recent, 2022,
Yes.
that provides you with what you need
Yes.
in order
Correct.
to be able to achieve that.
And that's the
Thank you.
Jerseyism, if you like.
Yes, thank you. Your current online safety policy, that was published in August 2021, 4 years ago now.
Yeah.
What work is going on?
Yeah.
Currently under review.
It is currently under review for exactly the reason that I think
Yeah.
all of us around the table would think. It's a long time in this environment. And to be quite frank, I think we need to have a process where it's not a constant review, but I think there's a constant undertaking of it's sort of update. It's like a live document.
Yeah.
It's like a risk assessment. A risk assessment, a lot of people don't understand that risk assessments are not documents that go on the shelf, they are live documents. They're the assessment of risk at that time and how that changes. And I think that's effectively what we have with that online safety policy. It is a risk assessment which will change with time as the risks change, because they do change.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't remember how long ago that TikTok was. It wasn't that long ago that TikTok became sort of abundant, is that the right word? That wasn't many years ago. Things change.
Okay, thank you. So do you follow the UK statutory guidance, the Keeping Children Safe in Education guidance?
Yes, we do, but we also have our own Jersey Keeping Children Safe in Education, and UK legislation supports
Supports what
what's
you
written in
do?
the Jersey
Okay,
one.
thank
Yes,
you.
absolutely.
So the formal guidance then related to supporting the online safety. If Jersey wanted to, could we depart significantly from the UK's framework?
I believe the answer would be yes. I think anything we do, though, has to be the right thing. And if there's something that's good, I think we can build on that. We have a unique position in Jersey over many things where we can build on what's there and do our own thing. So I believe the answer is yes, we can. And to some extent, yes, we do already, I would suggest, because it is a sort of Jersey-linked policy that we use. So yes, simple answer is yes. There's a straight answer.
So I guess this probably will fall to you, Alexa, but reviewing formal guidance and doing kind of a gap analysis in Jersey. My question was going to be: is there somebody in SIPES
Yes.
who's actually responsible for doing that? And I guess that person is you.
Yes, that's correct.
Maintaining an overview of what's going on.
Yeah.
Do you also look for more further afield than
Yes.
the UK?
Yes.
So we know that, for example, France have banned mobile phones recently.
Oh, I've just stopped it there because they did a trial.
Yes.
And they did a trial. I think, again, can I just stop, just make a point here? Sorry to interrupt. I think sometimes we have a world of absolutes around this topic and we need to look a little below the surface. They did a trial. They're looking at whether they will introduce that wider scheme. And one of the issues for the French government is going to cost them about €700,000 to put the things into schools that they want to do. And they're not entirely sure it's the right way to go about it. So they have done a trial, and that's a really interesting thing for us to watch. But I think when things are reported as they are banned, like in Australia, it's that you've got to look below the surface there of what that means. And I think sometimes that world of absolutes doesn't help the intelligent discussion that we need to have, because it's not quite what people think it is. Sorry, I didn't want to interrupt, but I just have to make that point.
No, I'm actually pleased of the interruption, because I mean the broader question was, are we looking globally,
Yes.
as opposed to just kind of blindly following, not blindly following, I don't mean that, but just following sort of UK guidance. And I think the answer that you've given just demonstrates that actually there has been some thought gone into.
I think there's an enormous amount of thought going into this. It's I think increasingly proactive is the way I would say it. We met as a group of, there was ministers, myself, economy department, home affairs, a children's minister to talk around this topic, and we will be doing that regularly to see where we are. And because this is it's not just cross government, it's cross our society, which I'm sure will come to at some
Yeah,
point.
no, we're really pleased since our hearing in October, I think last year, to see so much is now happening.
And it's interesting as well, because with the JCG policy, although they're not calling it a ban, effectively for year 7s and 8s, there is an absence of mobile phone use. Which is quite clear. So I guess that demonstrates an adaptation of a policy that works for a
I'll just say that's a really important point, I think, because I think with young people and where we are, just saying that's banned has never worked throughout our history. You know, smoking's banned, and I would controversially say some children smoke and they vape. We know that. It's not about banning. It's about working with children to say, this is not the right thing for you. And join with us. We've got a way to do this now, and let's make it better.
And I think from our perspective, just that's comforting to hear that that approach is taking place in Jersey. Thank you.
Yeah.
We asked in writing to confirm the numbers of online safety incidents that have been recorded in schools in 5 years. But you confirm from a departmental perspective that you don't have a central record because it's individual schools that are the data controllers. Is that a problem to you, that you kind of haven't got an overall view?
I wouldn't say it's a problem. It might be something, I think perhaps it's something we do need to look at.
I think it's something we need to look at. I know I'm probably, my colleagues back will be thinking, how do we do that? There are complexities around that. But when you actually ask the question, is that something we would like to know centrally, just to get an understanding of the challenge?
Yeah.
Of course, I think is the answer.
I mean, I would make a plea, though, if we're going to do that, that we just don't simply have FOIs that get spread across the newspapers with no context whatsoever about what's going on, because it doesn't help the discussion.
So what oversight does SIPES have then about individual incidents in schools? Would they have to be pretty severe before they're reported up to the department?
No, they are recorded. They'll be recorded as incidents on SIMS, for example. Most of the incidents...
How do you get to know about them, though?
There would be the serious incidents that we would get to know about. Most of the incidents, for example, that are flagged up, as somebody who taught biology and tried to do that online, if you teach anything about human reproduction online, it flags up an enormous number of words. And at the end of, I think, one lesson, there were, 77 incidents that have been flagged to the safeguarding lead, who came to see me and said, what on earth have you been doing today? So those anomalies will happen. Now, those are not serious incidents. They are just things that have happened in the due course of teaching. So the vast majority, I think, would be like that. The serious instance of someone trying to access something that is very, very harmful would be taken incredibly seriously. And there are processes within the schools, there are rules within the schools, there are behaviour policies within the schools. And I would assume that senior management would be involved and parents would be communicated with, because it's a safeguarding issue as well.
That's what I was about to say.
If to say, if a child accesses something like that, that is a safeguarding issue for that child. Why are you doing that? And it may well lead to larger problems, which will be uncovered.
So you're confident that you would get the feedback from head teachers about safeguarding incidents?
And the number of
that would
incidents
associate?
are recorded in schools. So
Yes.
as part of the safeguarding audit,
Yes.
that the number of incidents are looked at along with themes.
Sorry, may I make a point there, please? It was really important for me. This is exactly what we've done with incidents of violence in schools. Report everything, because we want to know. We want to be absolutely transparent. So I would make a plea to the media to please report that in context. And it's the same with this. I do not want any head teacher feeling I can't report these things because it'll be all over the press. And that is the issue that we have. There is not a single teacher or head teacher, I believe, that does not want to protect children and safeguard them in this way. And so, you know, we want that to be really open and be absolutely honest. This has happened. No one's going to be, you know, it's not about criticism, it's about recognition, and then let's deal with the safeguarding issue.
Absolutely.
In the online safety policy, schools are required to maintain accurate records and a log of online safety incidents. Is there an agreed definition of an online safety incident?
That's a really good question.
That is a really good question. It isn't in the current policy, as you're aware. But it is in the new policy.
Okay. Have you got a timescale for the new policy?
So actually, it's very near complete draft version.
Okay. So,
So
Well-
we can
imminently,
expect it
it's really
We'd be
near
happy to
complete.
share a draft with the panel. It's an
that would be
open
good.
document. I mean,
Yeah.
we want to get it right as well. But yeah, that's really difficult to define as well. I mean, it is a difficult one.
Yeah.
I'd rather err on the side of caution and have too many safeguarding incidents reported than not enough. I think, that's
So
that's not a problem.
with the monitoring of the online safety policy, it says that CEHA distributes daily reports to state schools about the suspicious search queries
Well done.
made on Google,
Wow.
the previous day. Is that process still undertaken, or has kind of ChatGPT and everything else superseded that?
No, it hasn't superseded it. But the flags, because now the systems are real-time alert flags, so anything that occurs, whether it's in a chatbot or wherever it is, will then automatically flag to the designated safeguarding lead. So the process has changed slightly because it's not a manual process now. It's a more automated
I
process.
think it's an
So
improvement.
can you give us an example of what a suspicious search record might be?
Who do I wanna-
within,
who wants to take
bear
that
in mind
one?
we're talking about in public, but just
Yeah.
a general.
I think if you, I think a search for violence,
Suicide.
There could be,
Suicide.
there could be a sexualised term.
Sexualised
there
term.
There could be a kind of something associated with violence or a weapon or something like that, and it can happen at all ages.
any
So-
reference to suicide, for example, would be
Okay,
flagged.
so that flags up to the
So far.
department. That
Yeah.
then
There are
goes-
levels of flags as well. So if something was that might be in the curriculum, but also might be a bit ambiguous, it might be a low-level flag, whereas suicide would be a high-level flag. Those are continually reviewed.
So the department would then flag that with the online safety lead for the particular school.
Yes.
Right.
How does the online safety lead know who entered that particular search term in a school of hundreds
Because they
of
would log on,
pupils?
would they log on to the time? It would be time and dated, and you'd know who logged on at that time.
Okay,
It
so,
would be
so
linked
it,
to
the
the
filtering
login.
does
Software
go
tells
to, the
you.
filtering
Yes.
software does go down to
Yes.
that granularity.
It does.
So that student, Helen Miles, has been logging on again,
Yeah.
and she's searching for who knows what, and you would be flagged.
Correct.
Okay.
It also takes a screenshot of whatever it
Yes.
was that you were doing as well.
All right, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. If in doubt,
I was just
ask
gonna say,
Alexa.
do you think there could be any of it, but that's
I had
was
to
waiting
say,
for you.
Come on,
I was waiting.
You were waiting.
We're 35 minutes in. That's not bad.
You knew I was going to say it.
Can I also ask, it's just my final question in this section, obviously you've highlighted that the reporting is granular, it sounds very, very good, data capture is good around that. How does those concerns get shared with parents and other members in the school? Is that using standard safeguarding procedures?
It's a
Well,
variety of ways, actually.
I think that's where obviously the school know about this. They will be notifying parents based on how they.
So,
But-
Absolutely.
But I think as well, I understand what you mean by standing safeguard procedures, but I think there's a real contradiction here, because there are standard safeguarding procedures, but I don't think any safeguarding incident is standard, because they are all specific to the situation at the time. So it's about, this is where how pupils are known by their tutors, by their teachers, by the management team. Perhaps they've had support in school. So if it's a particular child who's flagged this up, go to the form tutor and say, okay, yeah, that's been a concern for me. I'm really concerned. I want to raise this now.
okay, thank you.
It's a real good measure of that.
And just my final question,
Yeah.
what sort of volume are we talking about? You know, how many suspicious search queries do you get?
Do you mean like high level
Per day?
ones?
Yeah.
I don't know.
We can find it.
It'd be really-
Yeah, we can. I can give you a specific number. I wouldn't know off the top of my head.
Yeah.
But are we talking hundreds?
No, we are not. It's
No.
minimal.
Tens?
Yes.
Tens.
Yeah, and some of those will be, the most difficult lesson to teach online is PHSE, because you have to deal with all these topics. Just don't do it online is my advice, because the safeguarding lead will just not talk to you for 2 days, quite rightly, but anyway.
Can I just make a final point, is that the school is part of a wider network of safeguarding. So in those examples of where there's seriousness and the context, there might be a child who's looked after. There are clear escalation procedures up into safeguarding partnership, which can then be that information then can be shared, and to see if there's any meaningful correlation with anything else going on in that child. So whilst we're talking very specifically about a school and maybe a classroom, the school operates in a wider context.
Yeah, okay. Thank you very
Just
much.
one final thing on this. Can I say, if the systems we use are not perfect and we find that, we want to improve them. We don't want to hide anything. So if things come to people and they know, let us know, because this is a very changing world and it is an arms race, and we can only do this well if we're open about what's going on. And I'm quite happy to take, the critique in its truest sense of anything that we do, so that we can improve it. We're not going to hide anything. I think that's a very important point to make, just to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Actually, the next topic relates somewhat to what you've just said. A number of parents and individuals have got in touch with this panel as part of this review with concerns about children's access to mobile phones at school, and also the content access through mobile devices whilst at school. What is your opinion about whether students' use of personal mobile devices in schools is a problem or not?
Well, there are 2 points to this. There are 2 areas of this. One is that currently, and I think we've been through the figures so many times about schools, there are 2 of the secondary schools who use scheduled break times and lunch times only. 2 of the secondary schools by 12 and 13 students. They are 16, 17, 18 years old.
And can you say which schools those are?
It's Grainville and Hopeville and Holier. Okay. JCG has just implemented a no phone scene policy. All of the other schools do not allow mobile phones to be used in school at all. That is the important point to make. Now, how they manage that is up to the school. It is it's a no scene policy. In terms of access to online content, yes, I would be extremely concerned about young people accessing online content in an unfiltered, unprotected way. When they leave the school premises, it's very difficult to schools to manage that. It's impossible for them to do that.
Absolutely.
And if children have data, they can access. So that's the issue. And when I have read through all the submissions, and I would absolutely share the concerns in there. Now, if that is happening in our schools with policies that are in place, the thing to do is inform head teachers, talk to the school, talk about where that is, because that has to be addressed. It is a safeguarding issue. And it's not just a safeguarding issue for the children that have been exposed by someone, but the person who might be trying to expose children to that. That is equally as big a safeguarding issue, and we need to be dealing with that. I have to say, I think our schools need a bit of credit in what they've done over the last 3 years, because they have tried to turn back the tide of the mobile phone use. And school after school, by working with their staff and their students, come up with a policy which is to say we will not have phones in schools and we will change the culture. And now, so tomorrow I could say I'm going to announce a ban, and it would be 96% complete. It'd be a lovely headline, lovely thing to do, meaningless. And the reason that's meaningless is because it does not solve the problem. What will solve problems or address problems is exactly the process that schools are taking, is to say, we're going to work with our children, with our parents, and we're going to work as a school as to what we want to do.
I think we've got some questions on this a bit later.
Yeah.
So I share those concerns that are online. Yes, sorry.
We've spoken about Wi-Fi within the schools, etc., but the next question is about mobile data.
Yes.
Has CEHA considered the potential risk of online harms to students from their access to mobile data through their devices?
Yes, and we cannot control access through mobile data. We simply cannot switch that off. But the policies of not having phones being used. Now, this is, nothing's ever going to be perfect, but what that young person needs to be is educated in what they're doing here, because that is not the right thing to do. And why are you doing that? And what's gone wrong in that relationship with that child being safe online? And we need to address those relationships more than anything else.
Can you tell us about any challenges of including mobile phones and mobile devices in the CEHA's online safety policy?
Well, it is a challenge because, I mean, schools have never bought a child a mobile phone, I believe. I don't think we've ever had a child bought a mobile phone. And also, we can't we can't tell parents how to parent, and that we don't want a blame game. We're not. It's not about blaming parents. It's not about blaming schools. It's about that relationship together to say, look, these are real online harms. We need to be extremely careful for our young people. How are we going to do this? And we need the schools' policies to be supported by everybody. So when a school says we will not have mobile phones, then the children either don't bring them, but many parents might say they're getting the bus home, they're walking home, I want them to be able to contact me. I think a lot of the phones that are given are old phones that parents had previously and say, no, I want to buy a new phone, you can have my old smartphone. And I think that is, I don't know I couldn't even guess the percentage, but I would suggest a very high percentage of phones are done that way. So that, yes, there is a challenge there, a real challenge. But we are at a point where we're very close, I think, that we will have effectively a phone-free jurisdiction within our schools as best we possibly can. And that will raise the issue is how do we educate young people in the safety on those devices? And because we need to do both. And these are the contradictions we've got. We're living in a world of certain contradictions and absolutes, and we need to work around those things.
Minister, where should the responsibility for access to mobile devices sit when a student is in school?
Well, in school, teachers are in loco parentis, so they take on the role as parent. So therefore, the schools are responsible for monitoring mobile phone use, I'm sure. But when there's a clear policy in place, often in which parents have signed up for, then they can only try and implement that policy. I mean, if parents choose to, I don't know, text their children at school or whatever, it doesn't help the situation. I'm not saying that's the case. But I think the policies that have been developed of, not seen, putting in lockers and so on, is a very good idea. They're away from the child at the time. And I think we need to be building on those. The concept, I mean, I have no idea how a law would work. That would be a Home Affairs Minister would have to come up with some sort of law to say no child under 16 is even allowed a phone. I don't want to see our children criminalised. I don't know how that would work. I simply don't know how that would work. But that's a discussion, perhaps a wider discussion that needs to be had.
I mean, that we've discussed devices, but what about the content? The responsibility sit for that?
Well, it's interesting. I was watching something about the social media companies who talk about they have robust age verification in place, and that is the way they've got around the law in the UK. So we've got robust age verification processes in place. I'm sorry, forgive me for being cynical, but I don't think there is such a thing as a robust age verification process in that way. Sure. And so social media content is, we have given access to the entire sum total of human knowledge to everybody with a phone in their pocket. Good, bad or indifferent. How we control that is a societal discussion that we need to have. Schools can play one role in that.
Yeah, I mean, we've got some more questions on government strategy. Also, just to say, we're yet halfway through the question game, so if we can keep the answers concise.
Sorry, I'm trying to give as much information as I can. Yeah.
What is the response to parents who might say, I need more help to protect my child from accessing certain content on the internet?
I would say go and speak to the school, go and speak to teachers, come and talk to us. What can we put on to help with that? What information can we give you? Alexa, I know you do courses in schools to do exactly that. And I think that is an area we need to work on. But that would be a fantastic dialogue to have because as soon as we're involved with parents in school, educating in that way, that relationship develops and it becomes easier for everybody involved around that issue. I would absolutely encourage that.
Okay. We were grateful for your assistance in collating copies of different policies from government schools relating to the use of mobile phones. And we noted that there was a range of rules and requirements within these policies, and some of these, not all, referred to other digital devices. Could you provide your insight into whether the current approach is appropriately structured and if or more centralised policy or guidance would help ensure consistency across schools?
Do you mean in terms of mobile phones and smartwatches and so on? Yeah, well, it's interesting because there are some policies that are wide. In exam rooms, for example, you're not allowed to take a smartwatch or a phone.
No.
They're all handed in. In terms of schools, schools have developed policies which are very, very, very similar now. So I don't think it's a big step to have a central policy. But I think we're at a stage now where we could talk to schools collectively and come up with something that will, most importantly, be effective across all schools, because they've all bought into it and they all know what they're doing. Because sometimes, and this is not a criticism of you guys, but I will say there are central policies that impose them. Some schools will say, we don't know what to do with this policy. This is something that's been an iterative process over the last 2-3 years, and we are in a much better position than we've ever been. So actually, it won't be very difficult to put a central policy in place because it's virtually there.
Yeah.
So yes, that was something we can consider. Can I just say though, I'm sorry to go on again, we must not therefore though think we've got a central policy in place, that's that dealt
That's
with.
that, yeah.
Because it isn't. We know that and we're quite aware of that.
We would need to continue to work with school leaders to see about the current application of policies in schools. Is that being successful, or do we need to take another step?
Yeah, absolutely.
The next, there were some additional, I think you've dealt with. Do you think that smartwatches and other devices need to be covered by the mobile device policy in schools?
This is where my knowledge of things go astray.
So in terms of bring your own device, so further devices, there's very limited bring your own device in schools. Schools are encouraged to have, to support learning devices, so individual learning devices, and which have the appropriate safeguards on those devices, whether that's in the school environment or a home environment. So that would be covered under the central e-safety policy, and not a requirement for mobile devices where, as in mobile phones, where there might be access to 4G, for example.
Okay, because we did hear from one school of a little primary school child who came in wearing a smartwatch, who accidentally kept calling 999.
Yeah,
and
the police kept turning up.
I'm surprised that a primary school child has a smartwatch. They're quite expensive as well, aren't they?
Well, maybe it wasn't the best time, but yeah, we did hear about that.
Yeah, I think, again, this is this point about everything's moving on so fast. You know, smartwatches are available. This is allegedly a smartwatch. I'm sure I use about 1% of its functions. Things are moving so quickly, yes, and this is why I think the policies that we have need to be more like risk assessments, which are ongoing, so we address them as they come, and we can be as proactive as we possibly can. But yes.
I mean, the issue of smartwatches, you know, it's all right to say, well, the phone's in the locker, but if the phone links into the smartwatch, so if the policy doesn't cover the smartwatch,
Yeah, absolutely.
how does that work?
Well,
I think that's just a very good point. And it's the
yeah,
learning that we have to
absolutely.
have.
Because
That's
I know,
the-
you know, the JCG policy says your phone must be in the locker and it must be switched off, but is there a member of staff checking that it's switched off? It's
Well,
very
well,
difficult just to manage
yeah,
the practicalities of
But
it, isn't
but
it?
that is a very key point. How do you want to, you know, how would schools do this? We're talking about 800 children in schools every morning, and it's okay to say put them in lockers and switch them off. You could check that every morning if you wanted to. You're going to take 40 minutes out of the curriculum. So we have to have a point. This is why it's so important that we work on these policies with the young people involved. There is a reason for us doing this. We've agreed you're going to do this. We'll do it. It's like uniform. You know, children wear uniform because we've agreed it, and it's going to work. It's not always perfect, but we get there. It's like the culture of a school. We're going to buy into it. And I think that's the line we need to take. That's why I'm saying that I really hope that the dialogue around this can be less, you know, not divisive. What's the word I use? I can't remember. But anyway, but more constructive and more together, rather than being separated.
A lot of the questions supplementary on here, Minister, I think we've already dealt with. Bring your own devices, monitoring, filtering through Wi-Fi. So I'm going to pass on to the Chair.
Okay, thanks. So I've got some questions now around government strategy, and we've talked about all the things that schools are doing. So how does the government ensure that schools have the necessary tools and training to monitor and address online risks so that they have the resources there?
Yeah, and I think this is an area where we do need to, another area in our schools where we need to put more support in. I think that doesn't mean nothing's happening. An enormous amount is happening, but it's a very changing world. Teacher training now includes a very specific level of training on online, use of online. the JTTP, for example, and I'm certain that PGCEs in the UK would do that as well. I have a whole list of things here. Perhaps we could send them to you. There's 8. So new revenue funding to address technology will be needed. Digital divide. One of the issues is the digital divide. We can control devices that the school provide. The safeguarding of software and so on is improving. We believe that, and yes, it's an arms race, but we can keep up with that arms race. But some schools have much more access than others, which means that perhaps in some schools, that's why we're having more mobile phone use, if it is going to be used. During COVID, this was recognised massively, and many, many young people were provided with devices because it was the only way to access education.
Absolutely.
We're now at a point where in schools, if we can ensure that all children have access in a similar way, which is controlled carefully, I think there is an opportunity there to train and educate in a way of online safety and so on across the piece in that safe environment because of the controls that are in place with devices in schools.
Okay, so if I can ask something more specifically about budget then. So the panel understands that schools do not have a designated online safety budget.
Yeah.
So could you confirm how much of the SIPE central training budget has been used for online safety training?
Do you want to answer this, Keith, while I search for the page?
We spent approximately £6,000 for training in schools. Those schools themselves put a lot of training on themselves.
So 6,000 in total?
That's what the central department
Central.
provided. But as I said, schools do a lot of training themselves.
Okay.
Remember, there will be people who are specialists in schools, often the IT teachers, often the IT specialists who are there, and other staff who have real good knowledge. I had a member of staff who had excellent knowledge of Google Classroom, for example, trained the entire department. They do tend to become the person everyone goes to, so they regret it very quickly. But that's, we all know someone like that.
Yeah, yeah.
But also with that central training.
Absolutely.
But we want to recognise where more training is needed and target that.
I think it's quite important that a lot of our work, and I think we've been probably good at this at different points, and we need to be more consistent, but it's about the staff across the system in schools who are really good at stuff, sharing with staff in other schools, and it's creating those networks as the way of upskilling. It's not just simply an external amount of money. It's about enabling staff to learn from each other. Schools do that brilliantly themselves, and we need to encourage that more centrally.
Okay, that's good. Sticking to the funding, how much external sponsorship funding has been provided for online safety training? Because I think this was referred to in the letter that we had from you. And so we were just wondering about this.
I don't have a
Yeah,
figure
it says
in my
additional
head.
funding has been provided directly by external sponsorship.
We'll have to find that figure for you. Apologies for that. I don't
Could
have that figure in
just
my head.
write to us with more info
Yeah,
on
yeah,
that,
absolutely.
Okay, and then also, had the schools themselves, how much of their own budget are they having to put towards this as a general idea?
So it's very,
Involve £400,000 to schools.
yeah, £400,000 is devolved across schools to support this. But I think some of the support as well, as we say, is because it is a process that is ongoing. I mean, I can remember that what we would have is if I was wanting to teach something in a particular way using IT and I wasn't certain, and I had a colleague who was, that'd come in and support you at the time. I said, I'll come and help you with that. We can sort this out again. And it's about gaining that confidence and as you grow. So it's not simple to pinpoint that amount where the money's spent. Also, I would say, I don't know if it's the best way to spend money to have one training session at the end of the day or during an inset day and say, there you go, there's your online harm stuff done and there's your IT done for the next 3 years, a box ticked.
Tick.
I personally don't think that works brilliantly. Can be some things that work really well, of course there can. However, I think it needs to go on, but we do need to look at the way in which that funding is used.
Also, just a bit of clarification on that. That's money that's devolved to schools to spend on devices or how they see fit in schools. There's also digital services run the network, and so upgrades to do with the Wi-Fi and all the access points and how the systems run.
Okay, so that,
There's separate funding, it's not out.
I think also to add, Keith, yes, the school funding formula allows, as your point earlier, Deputy Miles, about children with additional needs. So that school funding formula then goes directly to that school, depending on the needs of that child, and there may well be digital devices, specific kind of
So can I-
technologies that are used. That's not held centrally, that's out to the school and how that school spends it for that child. So it's quite bespoke in that sense. So it's just to
That's a good
underline
point.
what the Minister was saying, it's difficult to have a figure, but I think it's important just to say that out loud.
okay, so just to clarify then, that 400,000, that's not just used for the training and so on?
No, that's
Yeah.
for devices.
Yeah, okay, for devices, right.
And there have been other points where the department has funded devices too, so it doesn't give quite an accurate picture of how much has been spent over the years, but that is the annual amount that gets put into school budgets.
Okay, but you're saying that you think this needs looking at a bit more?
What I would say is that whenever we train on something that is so changing, we've got to be open to saying we need to review it all of the time. And I think there is a role for those specialists within schools and sharing good practice as well. It's called professionalism. You know, professionals want to improve their practice, and we will do everything we can to try and support that.
Okay, so I know you mentioned briefly that there are some schools where there's a lot more digital stuff going on. So does digital inequality affect young people in Jersey, and how does it influence their access to tools and resources for online safety education?
I would suggest, there is digital inequalities, just as there are other inequalities in Jersey. How would it affect? Well, we're trying to prepare young people for a world they're going to go into, which is very much a digital world. The more access that's got in a controlled way that's safe, the more teaching can go on, and the more able young people are to access that world. And I think, yes, there is still more work to be done. I don't want to mention COVID again, but I can remember in COVID some young people accessing their work for a phone because that's the only digital device they had. And now I understand all the debates around that, but that was a really unique time that I think we learned a lot from, and I think we need to continue that learning.
Okay, I'm just going to skip a couple of questions. We can send you in writing later. And we had a very good submission, a very interesting submission from Public Health. So, Minister, how do the department and schools consider public health advice related to potential harms resulting from general screen use? Because there've been links to obesity, myopia, sleep disruption, poor posture, mental health concerns.
I think within the school day, that is something that is a lot easier to monitor and control. So within a school day, children, young people have a variety. We're talking mainly, we're not talking mainly secondary schools, we're talking primary as well. Throughout our schools, there's a variety of activities that go on during the day, a variety of lessons that might move subjects or lessons. I think the wider issue of what happens at home is something that I think that a public awareness campaign is a useful thing to do, and we would certainly support that. So, the stereotypical teenager sat in their bedroom playing online games is something that we need to address, and that advice needs to be given. And again, how can we support parents with that?
Okay, and something that is in control, though, of the school is the amount of time students spend on screens in school, and if any homework is set to be completed on screen.
Yeah, I think that is something that we need to look at really carefully in terms of particularly about homework. I think what's happened is schools have, and it's mainly secondary schools, I think, where this is something that's come up. I think because I think where it comes from, and I may be wrong here, and I'm quite happy to be corrected, is you have separate subjects. Now, within a subject, you think, I've got this fantastic online thing I can use. It's really good. It's got everything we want. We use it. Then another subject does the same, another subject. And before you know it, you've got an awful lot of stuff that's online. I think there needs to be more coordination of that and think about that. do young people have access at home on homework? Why are they doing their homework online at home? I've done it myself in the past. I had an entire GCSE psychology course online. It was fantastic. I thought it was great. But I did interaction with students think it's not the only way to do it. Within any delivery of a curriculum, you have to have a variety of means, and it will shift one way or the other. So yes, that is something that is very interesting for us to look
Can I just
at.
add
Yeah.
that schools often where they set homework online, that's partly because they are trying to equip children with the correct skill set for online exams, which are coming.
Yes.
And it's really important that children are be able to take those exams online efficiently.
Yeah, okay, I understand that. I'm just thinking, you know, if it's day after day of screen use for many hours, is any scientific assessment undertaken, or hasn't been so far, about the potential harms and benefits of using educational technology in school?
In Jersey, there's a scientific
Yeah.
assessment gone on. I think we can only use studies from elsewhere. But yes, that would be very interesting to see, and I think it's a question for us in a wider society.
This is a question of balance, isn't it? It's about recognising the challenge of screen time. As Alexa says, equipping young people with the right skills and at the right appropriate age that this happens. And I think we need to understand a bit more about that.
Yeah.
I think I do have to flag up, and it's something I'm sure we'll look at in the future, all of us, is that Alexa raised a very good point about online exams, and we were discussing this previously. They're coming, and they're real. And how do we equip our young people for that? The reason they're coming is it's a lot easier and quicker to mark them, and a lot cheaper, to be quite frank.
Well, there's no forests being cut down every year for the Oxbridge exam system, yeah.
Well, all exams are marked online, by the
Yeah.
way, because they're scanned. I've done it myself. I used to work for an exam board and mark chemistry papers, and I never had papers delivered. They were all online, used to access.
Yeah, that's
okay.
correct. Yeah. Okay, I think that's mine. It's Helen now.
I've just got some questions around sort of the impact of online harms and the support that is available. So what support and protection is there for children who are experiencing cyberbullying?
Yeah. Schools have bullying policies, but it's not just about policy. It's about schools being aware that when a child is not in a good place, and the support is there. So generally there is support within schools around all areas of bullying, and I think that's really important. The key is that cyberbullying is something that is new, I suppose, not that new anymore, different from face-to-face issues that, you know, someone's been horrible to me today, he said this to me, she said this to me. Teachers have been dealing with that for years, for many, many years. I think it's two things. One is about having an openness so that young people can report it, so that they can see it happening, and two, then the follow-up to that within the school as well. But that's when I think families and parents need to be involved as well. Plus, I think it happens in our system, and we can monitor it. That's a lot easier. But I read some of the things, and I would really want people to contact schools, talk to safeguarding leads, and let's deal with those issues as they arrive. And let's be really on the ball about the way they're dealt with. Do you want to add anything to that, Keith?
Do you have any specific policies about involving the police in some of the areas?
That's a very, very good question, and I think when you speak to the Home Affairs Minister, that we had a really good discussion about that the other day in a meeting. There are a lot of laws which actually young people need to be extremely aware of and careful of, because they could get themselves very simply and quickly into the area where they are committing a crime. And I think that's part of the education piece. Actually, what you think is an innocuous thing, well, that's extremely nasty, is illegal. If you take an image of somebody and misuse it, it's illegal. And I think we need to, I think that's the piece of work that needs to go on across our society. These are the laws that exist. This is what is illegal in our society.
But in terms of the SIPES threshold, so if, for example, you have an act that could be considered criminal within the school environment,
We would report it to the police.
You haven't. Is that automatic? Do you require the consent of the parents?
It's a good question. I think the school would report it to the police and the community police officer for advice on what to do next. And I think in terms of the perpetrator or the person being...
Both. Again, it's just the question about boundaries and thresholds, because, you know, if you've got the ingredients of an offence committed within your school, but for example, the parent says, well, actually, I don't want you to report this to the police.
No, you're right. And I think advice would have to be taken, legal advice would have to be taken. This is where the community police officer is involved, so important role in schools.
Okay.
Because they are attached to schools and they know. If a child does something, which is, to be quite frank, to put it simply, just really stupid, and they've done it and they've got themselves in a whole lot of mess, and it's the first time ever, etc., etc., involving the community police officer can have a massive impact.
Yeah.
To involve with the family, etc., etc. Whether that needs to go to a actual criminal prosecution or a prosecution of any form is another question, needs to be gone through. I hope we don't have to criminalise children to change behaviour that they learn from it. It's part of the education piece.
We can
sorry.
No, just to add to what you're saying, and if we use a safeguarding gaze on that example,
Good point.
then in a school that they are concerned about the act and also other contributing factors, that route of escalation to other safeguarding partners, which would include the States of Jersey Police, is an example
Does give you some sort of mechanism.
and it will give you the bigger picture quite quickly, and as those kind of multi-agency safeguarding meetings or discussions will quite quickly give you a clear steer in terms of how to deal with the...
Thank you.
The age of criminal responsibilities is 16.
10.
Yeah, but for online, is it different?
Distinguish.
10.
But it's your point about criminalising.
Yeah, and we've got a parish hall inquiry system, obviously, another
No,
mechanism.
I'm just thinking what happens with 16 and 18-year-olds, because I think... But we're getting into Maya here, sorry.
So we've talked about the cyberbullying. How are we addressing the risks around sharing and accessing self-harm and suicide-related content online in schools?
This is one of the biggest concerns I have. I'm a parent as well. My children have grown up, but I still worry unduly. Well, I don't think I do. With our online systems that we can control, we have I think that with good filters we can measure, we can intervene. I think it's the areas we can't control, outside school, with mobile phone, and this is where the education piece, I think, with parents and parents working with schools is really important. This, I think, is an area where a public health campaign, not just from schools, but from Home Affairs, from Economy Department. I had a very interesting meeting with the Institute directors and some others who came along, including somebody who made a submission to your panel. Really, really good open discussion. So what can we do in that arena to talk to businesses about how can we help with online harm? I think those groups across our society working together is one of the key things. We can't do everything in schools. Parents can't do everything on their own. Young people can't do everything on their own. They're going to meet a point where they need help.
And what resources are available to children and young people that have experienced online harm?
Through safeguarding, there will be referrals to support, through CAMS if necessary, through...
There'll be training for teachers in understanding the science of schools. There'll be expertise provided through just various training staff and best practice.
What information,
Go on, you say.
what information have we got to show that those resources are actually effective in providing the appropriate support?
It's actually just been embedded into the safeguarding audit. That's a recent update, so I wouldn't be able to collect data previously, but going forward...
But you've acknowledged that.
Yes, absolutely.
Having said that, it's not easy to do. It's really not easy to do in terms of... But I think it's a really important step forward. And this is the point I made ages ago in this, is that if things aren't perfect, don't try and hide that. Let's try and improve them. Yeah.
Can I just ask a quick question? Because you mentioned the safeguarding audits a few times. So what happens to the outcome of those safeguarding audits? I expect that goes back to the school and the school's head
So they
teachers
work.
discuss
So
it?
we work with the school as
Yeah.
opposed to it's a partnership. The whole point is a self-improvement
Right,
tool.
okay.
So the idea is as a living document to make the improvements if there are any in any specific areas.
So school gets the audit and it goes back, and you said that was done yearly.
Yes.
Is there an expectation from the department that if kind of 2 months later the
Yes.
schooling encounters a different, something that they haven't come across before, then that wouldn't wait until the next
Absolutely.
safeguarding audit?
And that's the openness I'm talking about. And if we can get anything across the schools today, it is please, let's have that conversation, because we know this is a changing world. And it's not fine. We'd rather it didn't and stayed static and we were in charge of it, or it would be great. But the reality is not that.
Yeah, and just before I'm just going to move on to some children's rights stuff, but before I do that, what we are obviously going to hear from schools, but what do you think head teachers would say is the biggest challenge? Where's the biggest challenge that they're really asking for support from the department for?
I think personally, and I'll ask Keith as well because he's got a real insight into that, there are two things for me. One is the networks that they have that they can control to keep them up to date in Wi-Fi and all of the equipment within the schools, and it's that digital inequality thing. That I think is a huge challenge. The other challenge is that the uncontrollables. That how can we police mobile phones and be supported to do that? Because we are being asked to police it. Let's not beat around the bush. Schools are being asked to say, we're not going to have mobile phones, and 96% of the time they're not, more than that now, and it will become 100%, I'm sure, pretty soon. How are we going to police that? What happens if they don't get support from outside, from parents? What happens when incidents do happen and they escalate? Because for some young people they will, and that's the support that is needed. And if I give a really clear message today from this hearing, which is please support schools in the policies they have. Talk to your children and say, this is your school's policy. I want you to do this when you're at school. I will not support you if you are caught doing anything else. And don't come running to me when your phone's taken away for a week and confiscated. And don't make me want to have to go into school and get your phone back. Have that conversation with your children. Support the school, and the school will support you. That will really help head teachers, I think.
I had some questions around voice of the child, but I think you've articulated those really clearly throughout the hearing. So I'm just looking. I don't know, Chair. We haven't got much time left, so I'm just wondering if we could maybe put some of the UNCRC questions into writing.
Yeah, probably.
And then pass maybe over. Perhaps if I can just ask 33, the one question. In 2017, as we know, the Independent Jersey Care Inquiry highlighted that Jersey had historically lagged quite far behind other jurisdictions in updating its child protection laws.
Yeah, absolutely.
Clearly, a lot of work was done, and the 2022 law has come in, and you've articulated the actual breadth of that law. So thank you for doing that. How do we ensure that legislation to address online safety isn't similarly delayed? What do you see as your role as Education Minister in that?
I think the recognition that children and young people need to be included as part of any digital harms guidance is important. Also, where the legislation sits and what it aims to do, I think needs to be clearly defined. Because I am concerned a little that we could pass, I don't mean to be critical of the UK government, but I think they passed legislation, and I think there is a concept that that's it, we've fixed it, and they simply haven't. And whether that legislation is, I saw something, I think you'll probably talk about this later with other ministers, I need to look at it again because it was suggested to me, I'd like to read about it, is that since they've passed the law, things have actually got worse. Now, that's either poor legislation or it's not being applied appropriately. I think the legislation means that it needs to be right for Jersey and right for our children. That's what we've learned from the Care Commission, to include exactly that.
Yeah, I think what I'm trying to get at is the priority
Yeah.
of this.
I see, yeah.
You know, the independent Jersey Care Inquiry
Yeah.
concluded, you know, the welfare and interests of children are absolutely paramount
Yeah.
and trump all other considerations, and that was actually a line.
No, I agree.
So when you're sitting around the Council of Ministers table and you're discussing legislative priorities, you know, how are you as Minister going to remember that comment
Yeah.
to make sure that things like online safety are prioritised over other
Well,
areas,
I
given
bel-
the seriousness of this topic?
Yeah, I believe you're talking to the Minister later and he may have something to say to you. So I can't say anything there. I don't want him because that wouldn't be the right thing to do. But yeah, absolutely. And as I mentioned, the group we had the other day, I think that is one of the places for that as well. And I know I have to support the Children's Minister. I know the Economic Development Minister who has a role for some of the law. Certainly would want to make the right changes. And I know that the Home Affairs Minister can point to a number of laws, particularly around violence against women and girls, for example, which will be applicable. So I think things are coming together, and I think that priority is there. I would just say we need to make sure the legislation is right and effective, because what we don't want to do is tick a box. There's another part of the care inquiry saying you can't just tick a box and say it's done. It's an ongoing process. But yes, it's a good question, and I think it's an ongoing challenge and one that we should all take on, and I hope it's taken on by everybody across the Assembly as well, because we're all corporate parents.
Yeah,
we need to
indeed.
remember that.
Yeah, thank you
But
very
thank
much
you for,
that
and thanks
answer.
for the question. And we will keep that in mind. Thank you, seriously.
Yeah,
Yeah.
And actually just, I was going to mention about the role of corporate parent as well. It means
Yeah.
that the Minister for Education has to also look at the welfare of children across the board, as does the Home Affairs Minister and the other ministers we're questioning.
I think.
So, yeah, I've just got some questions around the future outlook now. So I think one of the main ones I'll ask is, where do you see the most significant gaps or weaknesses in our current approach to safeguarding children online?
Yeah, well, I think there's two things. One is it's significant because of the changing environment that we have. We have to be realistic about the speed of change and keeping up with that change. That is a significant risk. And I think we're all aware of that. And deep down, it frightens all of us. But also, there is an enormous amount going on with a change of approach in terms of not just having a policy that's on the shelf. It's not. The approach is that we're developing policies, we can call them policies, but they're ongoing. So that's one of the risks, keeping up. The other one is around those things that we can't control, like access with mobile phones. We can get to a point in the schools where mobile phones aren't used. We can get to a point where they won't be used at any point during the school day. But children's lives are more than just a school day. There are many, many, many hours. The largest percentage of the time is not spent in school. So we have got a real challenge as we go forward and how we keep children safe with smartphones. It would be great, perhaps, if children didn't have smartphones at all. I have absolutely no idea how that would be managed, because you'd need every single parent on the island on board. And there are parents who would say to me, don't tell me how to parent. Many would. So we have that challenge. That's the contradictions we have. But what we need to do is move away from absolutes, and we need to work together as a society, for all walks of our society, to say, what do we want for our children in terms of this? We need to model it as adults. So the biggest challenge is going to be that. Do I have a solution? I don't think any of us have one solution, but I think collectively we can get to a much better position than we are perhaps now across the piece. And I think this sort of discussion, the openness of communication, I think is really important. I think it would be great if we had less sensationalist stuff in our media and those discussions, and a more sort of measured and thoughtful approach to what we want to do, find the common themes, and let's all work to them together. And just one final thing I would say to adults, please try and model the right behaviour online, because they don't.
Yeah.
It's a real problem.
Okay, thanks. So actually talking of absolutes, in protecting children from exposure to harm through the conduit of the internet or electronic devices, is that different to protecting children from exposure to any other types of harm like tobacco, alcohol, driving a car? Because these are absolutes, aren't they?
I don't know how to answer that question because we have clear rules around alcohol and tobacco. Yes, of course. The problem with online is online isn't just harm. Online is also the world that we live in. So yes, if I could pass a law now that says all online harm is banned, be great, be fantastic. Let's do that. Absolutely, no one would disagree with it.
No.
Okay.
But we have to define what that is. So it is more complex than that. But what we can do, just try and work. I think there needs to be more responsibility from the social media providers,
Yeah.
from content providers as well. All societies are having challenges with that. I don't know what the solution to that is.
So do you think in that case that legislation should be part of the protections in place for children?
Again, I'm going to say it depends what that legislation is. The legislation has to be clear as to what it will actually address. And if it's clear as to what it addresses and works, then yes, I would be very supportive of it. I think we have things that are already there that we need to emphasise more. There are lots of laws around online behaviour, around data protection, about what data is and how we use it. But I would, and this isn't a cop-out in any way, because this is what I mean, I would support any legislation that is effective and the right thing to do. I don't think we can just impose legislation from somewhere else for Jersey. I think we've got an opportunity to do the right things that we want to do in a simple way if we actually take that on board. So if it's the right thing to do, yes, I would support it. But if it's a token gesture, we need to avoid that, because that avoids the discussion in the first place.
Okay, so if it's clear, you would support legislation.
If it's the right legislation, let me get that clear. It's really important. I don't want the panel to go away and think, I'm going to say, oh, any legislation that comes forward, we desperately need of it.
Well,
no,
think-
let's look at what comes forward
I think we're
first.
always looking for the right legislation,
Yeah.
aren't we, rather than any legislation.
Yeah.
So just probably the last question then, and we will have some written ones, if that's okay,
Yep.
to follow up. So, Minister, should there be an island-wide strategy for protecting children from various forms of online harm?
Yes, that's exactly what we need, an island-wide strategy on all elements of our community. Now, we've got to be careful though when we talk about strategies, because they become, again, documents that go on a shelf. I think what we need is an island-wide discussion and openness about where we are. Every member of our community thinking, what is my responsibility in this? Be it businesses, being those who sell phones, those who sell data, parents, schools, the health, all of these organisations, we need to start talking about what do we want for our young people. I'm a parent. I was happy for my child to have a phone, but I was obsessed with what they were doing with it. They're now 25 and 28 and teaching me how to use my phone, which is quite interesting. So that's not going to go away. But I will say, yes, a strategy there. I think some credit and some examples of what to do could be taken from schools, because they've spoken to young people, they've included their young people in changing their policies, and they're trying to get somewhere where they're changing that behaviour with them, not to them. And I would say to the panel, if you want to talk to young people, we can help facilitate that. And I would always recommend, if you're going to talk about this, and it's interesting, I would ask you whether you actually have had meetings with young people themselves and students of all ages, because you will get an insight which we don't have because we're not that age. If we can help facilitate that, we'd be more than happy to do it. Every time I've spoken to young people about this, I've learned something new. And it's such an insight that you get from young people.
So who would be drafting and organising this online, this island-wide strategy?
I think it needs to be a collective approach. I think the group that we've got together with myself, the Children's Minister, the group that we had the other day and officers could certainly be a group that would work on something like that. So yes, but it also, I think we need to include.
Is the ministerial safeguarding group still in existence?
Yeah, it is. It could be that. But again, I wonder whether we need to. I wonder whether it starts with an emphasis from the sort of discussions that are happening, because things are changing quickly. and then could become ingrained in that group simply, but they need to have something that they're working on in the first place. And it could be, you know, I don't know, we can't proceed because it's such a complex area. I think awareness is such an important thing, and that's where the public health issue comes in. So we had a good meeting yesterday and we looked at the laws and the way there are a lot of very strong laws that exist already.
Yep.
And I did sit there and think, well, we've got a lot of laws. Well, do people know about these? Because I was on this panel some time ago and we talked to the Home Affairs Minister and I'd forgotten a lot of this. So I think there's a lot there that we can already use as well. There's a lot of constructives that have been there.
We have got those laws, and I know from our discussions there's some that there's not much awareness of at all, aren't there?
Yeah.
But also there's a complete lack of laws around quite a lot of harms to children too. So it's not a complete picture, is it?
I think that just to add to the Minister's point about strategy, I think you've got some existing strategic vehicles, such as the Children and Young People's Law, that could be used as a vehicle to drive forward programmes of intervention. I think that's always the nervousness, isn't it? Is that you write a strategy, and as you've just said, you know, who's actually doing the intervention? Where's the change?
And where's the funding for?
So with the Children and Young People's Law, that's a Children and Young People's Plan. You've got something there that's malleable and can be shaped, so you can get into programmes of intervention quite quickly.
I wonder if we've been brave enough in the past to intervene in places because, you know, it's a nanny state. And what I mean by that is you don't just take one approach. We recognise that parents have different views. Some parents don't want to be told what to do. However, they do might need intervention to say, look, okay, we're not going to tell you whether you should buy your child a mobile phone, but this is the reality of the world that's there. And this is what you can do about it. I know, Alexa, you've spoken to some parents who come to you desperately asking, what can I do to control this?
They have, yeah.
And you talk about their router, and some parents say, what's a router? And you say, well, okay, we can do this. And so there are things that we can do as well. I'll explain it to you later, Constable.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
I won't
Potato
explain Sorry.
I think that's it then. We'll follow up with questions in writing that we've missed out